Hey guys, Andrew here from M&A Softworks. Finally got around to getting this devlog out. Sorry for the late posting. I've been pretty busy still. Finals week coming up, so that's fun. Anyway, um, in the background here, I have a time lapse of a lot of coding that I got done for the voxel system. In the beginning here, you basically see me. What I'm doing here is I'm basically kind of figuring out exactly what I need to do to get the voxel system to work. Um, So this isn't actually what ended up in the final system that I have built right now. This part contained a lot of stopping, checking, finding out what resources are available, and basically figuring out how to do this in the first place. And this was never really intended to be in the final game, which is why it isn't. Um, I spent a lot of time doing this. You might notice about pretty early on in the video, the software which I'm coding in changes, which was I'm glad I finally got the new software working. Basically, what it was in order to get the voxel system to work the way I had figured out how to do it, I needed a newer version of the game engine, Unity. So I had to update it, and this kind of leaves a problem because the current version of the game, 0.2, runs on Unity 5.5. Point something, it's just a minor patch there, but which was released in 2016, mid 2016. So, but in order to get the system to work, I had to update it to 2018, um, and I put it on a long-term support version. So hopefully, I won't have to update it to a new version again for a good portion of time. The result of this, though, is that before I can actually even merge the two together, merge the voxel system in with the actual game, I need to update the game to the new version of Unity, which is where the 0.3 update comes in, where I'm going to I'm gonna basically update it to the newest version of Unity. I'm also going to restructure the entire code and basically just almost redo it in a more organized fashion that will run better and it'll cut down on um, how much CPU and RAM usage and whatnot. Basically, make the game run better. Hopefully, improve performance. Um, which isn't too big of a deal at this stage. There isn't a whole lot in the game right now, but it's mostly to set up a good baseline for when I bring the very bulky voxel system in to help performance a little. Another thing I'm going to do, because I don't quite know how long it's going to take me to get the voxel system where I want it. I'm probably almost halfway done with it. It's really hard to say. Um, I'd say I'm about a third of the way done with it, probably. Um, but it's hard to say. So, while I'm at it, since I'm basically going to remake the entire game, I figured may as well just go, because it's not too much extra effort to go and remodel the 3 models there are in the game and recreate like the 3 or 4 textures there are, and basically give the game a big graphical update. And well, because I'm going to add things like post-processing and whatnot to make the game look better anyway, so I figured may as well give the models and textures an update. Because again, I don't know how long it's going to be. It might be 2 weeks before I release the 0.4 update, after I release the 0.3, or hopefully it's not this long, but it's possible it might take me a couple of years, though. If I had to throw out an estimate, I'd say probably I'll have 0.4 out before next summer. That's not a promise, though, so, but I will do my best. Regardless, if nothing else, I'll make the game look a little nicer. As hopefully many of you know, pretty much everything in the game right now is mostly placeholder to basically give you something to look at while you're messing around with gravity. Because 0.1 was to add gravity, 0.2 was to refine it and add some other things in, like lighting, and just set up some baseline stuff. 0.3 was originally supposed to be the new voxel update, which, by the way, you hear in the background, you can see I've got the culling system that culls faces on the inside of the surface, faces of blocks that you can't see. That's mostly working at this point. I've got a lot of bug fixing to do, though I don't know. Actually, yeah, this is after the bug fixing. If you saw there, I had like 44 errors, and that took, most of it was cut out of this, but it actually took like a good 3-4 hours to bug fix, and it was not particularly fun. Anyway, I'm getting off track. But 0.3 now is going to bring it up to the new game engine, so I was just saying. Then 0.4 will add the voxel system in, which is really going to be the heart and soul of the game. So that's kind of where I'm going with it right now. This system that you're seeing in the back, I actually fully created this myself and had to set it all up. And you can see what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set it up so what this loop is this loop. You know, this is before the bug fixing. This loop that I've set up, basically whenever the code calls and says, "Hey, put a block here," what the code does is it goes into this loop and it starts at 1, and that number that is in the loop is also used for which face it's supposed to load. So if on the first time through the loop it loads the top face, which I think I'm actually about to code here, but it'll load the top face, and when it loads it, before it does, it'll check and say, "Hey, is there a block to this side?" So it will, when loading the top face, it'll look up and it'll say, "Is there a block right there?" And if there is, then it's not going to load the top face. That really improves performance because, you know, with a chunk of 4,000 blocks, which is a 16 by 16 by 16 chunk, it's a little more than 4,000, but you get the idea. Each block has 6 faces. So if we have 4,000 blocks with 6 faces, that's 24,000 faces per a chunk. There's 2 triangles a face, that's 48,000 triangles. And there's 3 points per triangle, so that's 144,000 points the game has to map out. 144,000 UVs it has to calculate, and then it has to put it all together into 4,000 plus meshes, create, 24,000 game objects, and attach them all to their appropriate game objects with their meshes and colliders and all that. And that, of course, as you could probably imagine, drains your performance a lot. So this whole thing that I'm setting up here, once you know what you're doing, it's fairly easy to set up a voxel system. The hard part is setting up the culling so blocks that you can't see aren't loaded. Otherwise, it drains performance. If I wanted to make a simple voxel system, I just have a line of code that spawns the block that's already defined in the game engine at points. But that is really bad because that will slow down your computer a lot because it doesn't cull faces. So most of the time has been spent setting up this face culling system so that, if there's a block in the middle of the chunk where I can't see it, then it won't load. And to do all of this, I basically have to create a map of the whole world in the code that says, hey, this block's air. Hey, this block is a filled block. So right now, there's actually only 2 types of block in the game, which is 0, which doesn't actually have a name, and then there's 1, which technically doesn't have a name, but I'm calling it stone because that's what it's going to be, and 0 is going to be void, empty space. I already have an idea of how I'm going to add in more blocks. I'm basically going to set up a system where it's negative numbers are going to be transparent blocks and positive numbers are going to be non-transparent blocks. That will allow me to have basically infinite amounts of either type without having to redo things. So what I can do in the code is I can basically, in the line of code where it says, hey, if the when it checks to see if there's a block to one side, it will check and, it basically checks this coded map, which is just a bunch of numbers, and right now they're all zeros and ones. It'll say, hey, is the number at this position 1? If it's equal to 1, then there's a block there, don't load that face. What I can do is I can change that so it goes, is it less than 1? And if it's less than 1, it will load the face, and if it's more than 1, it won't. and that will allow me to not have to redo that bit of code as I add more transparent blocks in the future. So some of the block IDs I already kind of have figured out. -1's going to be air when I add that. 0 right now is void, as I said. 1 right now is filled, but that's just stone. 2 is probably going to be dirt. 3 will probably be grass, and then we'll see where it goes from there. It's going to be a lot of work to get the full system working. What I need to do now is I need to set up the chunk the rest of the way, so that way you'll see at the end of this video the chunk is only a flat plane. It's a 1 block tall flat thing. So I basically need to change that so it actually is a cube. And then so I need to set up the chunks properly, and then I need to basically code the world, set up so that way there'll be multiple chunks, and I'll have a big thing. And then I'm either going to do a mining and building system then, or I might do it in the next bit. I'll probably do it then, and obviously mining and building will be important, but also the biggest thing is I need to set it up so that way when I mine a block, and here you can see I finally get it to start loading faces with the culling system on. But what I need to get it so that way when I mine a block, it basically will take the position of that block in the code map, set that to 0, then reload just that one chunk, and reload just the one chunk without that block. And I also need to set it so that way when the block when a block is placed, it does the exact opposite. It sets the block there to be 1 and then reloads the chunk, and then it'll load it with the block there. That's the system I want to set up. Once I've got that, or if I choose not to do that in this version, I'll basically release this kind of tech demo almost, and I'll release that as a thing that you guys can mess around with and walk around in. It won't really be a game, but it'll be more of a, you can look and see exactly what I've been doing. Here you can see I run into a very big problem, which is the blocks the right faces aren't being cut. So it's loading faces on the inside of blocks and culling the faces on the outside of blocks in certain positions. So like blocks to the north and blocks to the east were the only ones that were being loaded, and everything blocks to the north, east, top, and bottom were the only ones being loaded, and all the other ones were being cut. And I was trying to figure out why, and I spent a lot of time trying to get it to work, which is what most of the bug fixing amounted to, was trying to get that to work. But yeah, anyway, once I get this working, once I get the chunk and the mining system set up, if I do the mining system, I'll then release it as a tech demo that people can mess around with, and I'll start work on basically adapting this flat plane voxel system to a spherical world voxel system, which will actually give you a planet-like sphere, and then I'll incorporate the gravity system into it, so you can actually walk around the sphere and mess around and mine. And at that point, I'll have to probably code in occlusion and Fulstrom culling, so that way blocks that are behind you and blocks that are blocked from your line of sight won't be loaded, not just things that are inside. Because as it is right now, when I say a block, and here you can see me laying out the code map there of the blocks, but as it is right now, blocks that are on the inside of other things, their faces aren't loaded, but it doesn't actually check to see if you can see it. It checks to see if the block to any given side is air or filled, if it's void or stone. And if it's stone, then it doesn't load the face. If it's void, it does load the face, which is basically what I've got going on right now. So it doesn't actually cull faces that are occluded from your view, or occlusion culling. So I'm going to need to set that up, and because that's the surface of the planet curves away, it's still exposed to void, but you can't see it. So you can imagine a 60-kilometer across planet, that's going to be a lot of blocks. The surface area of, let's see, 60 kilometers, surface area is going to be, I think it's to the second power. Yeah, I think. So the surface area of the cube at 50 kilometers would be 50 multiplied by 50, 250,000 blocks, if it's 50,000 blocks across. So that's the diameter of the planet. If the diameter of the planet is 25,000 blocks, then the surface area is 250,000 blocks that are all being loaded. So that will obviously tank performance a lot. So I need to set up occlusion culling and Fulcrum culling, so things that you can't see aren't being loaded. I'll also need to fully integrate chunks up, so that way, while the blocks will still exist in the game world, which is what I'd like, their meshes will be combined into one single mesh in the chunk, rather than a whole bunch of little pieces, which will hopefully make the whole system run even faster and improve performance even more, which is one of the biggest gains of having chunks, is that, and I need to get that working. So once I get the spherical planet working, then I probably will post that also as a tech demo. Then I'll basically go and take it and implement it fully with the current game, get the whole thing set up, and then I'll probably add a couple of different types of blocks like dirt and grass, and that will be the 0.4 update, and the 0.5 update. One of the biggest things that's going to add is going to be air, which will add realistic atmospheric effects and drag and whatnot, and that's going to be a lot of hard work. I already kind of have a faint idea of how I'm going to do that, but that's going to be fun to get working. As it is right now, one of the biggest problems I have with the actual game itself right now, not so much the voxel system, switching gears here, is there's a huge bug, which is, I'm sure people who have played the game have noticed, is if you get too far from the planet, you start seeing this jittering, or things seem to start shaking back and forth. And what that is your position in the world is kept track of with what's called the floating point number, which I think it's 8 digits long in this case. So you have 8 zeros, if you imagine, and there's a decimal point that basically will move around based on how far out you are. So if you're in the very center of the world, then you have 0.0000 on for 6 zeros, 1. So 0.601%, point precision accuracy. So you know where you are within that given area. But if you're 10,000 blocks out from the center, then you're losing. Then you only know where you are down to the nanometer, which that still sounds like a very small amount of distance, but you need to know where you are within a given area, because the game will basically take whatever's supposed to be in a given point and basically move it around into all the possible positions it could be in that given area. So you want a higher accuracy, because even at nanometers, you'll start noticing that the points that are used to draw the meshes will start kind of shaking around, and things will, like, you may not notice it consciously, but you'll subconsciously notice things don't look quite right. They're kind of shaking. And it really gets drastic when you move out to hundreds of thousands of meters onward, because at 100,000 meters, you don't know where you are in the millimeter. And that's definitely a distance that probably a lot of people can imagine in real life, in their mind. At 1 million meters, you don't know where you are in the centimeter, which you will notice that. So when you go out to like where the moon is, you don't know where you are within the centimeter to decimeter area, and that basically means that you start jumping around these huge distances, and you start seeing it, and things start shaking. This, by the way, is directly responsible for when when objects, like if you've ever been on the surface, when a moon passes by when the moon passes by overhead, and it's right on the edge of what the camera can render. It's right through that culling plane as it kind of disappears into the void there. As I like to say, you'll notice that it doesn't quite do it right. Parts are shaking, and it's really weird. That's what's causing that. The shadows glitching on the pad, where you have these weird lines from the shadows that aren't loading right. That's what's causing that. And this ultimately comes down to a failure, not really a failure, but a shortcoming in Unity's engine, because Unity was not designed to handle extremely large distances. And the only real way to fix this problem, and it's not really so much a fix as putting a band-aid on it, is to load, is to basically set the center of the world to always be the player's position, which means that when you move your rocket to one position, you walk over to the other place, you don't move, everything else moves in the game engine, which fixes the problem from a player's perspective, but you still will get issues like that when the moon is falling out of the culling plane. It starts doing that weird shimmering type effect. You'll still get that. And the way to fix that I'm thinking of doing, that I'll probably end up doing, is when you get beyond a certain distance, physical objects in the game will stop loading. They'll cease to exist, and they'll be replaced by a little picture that will be a certain distance away from you and will get scaled and moved around in accordance to where the position of that planet would be. So you'll basically have, instead of, when you get a certain distance above the planet won't actually exist anymore. Instead, whenever you look at a planet, you're looking at a little picture of the planet that's only 100 meters away from you, and will get bigger or smaller according to how close or far the game says you are from where the planet's supposed to be. That might sound like you'd notice that straight away, and you'd be like, that doesn't look right, and you probably will, so I'll have to figure out how to make that smoothie, but that's really the only way to fix that problem. So that's definitely something I want to tackle. I don't want to tackle anytime soon, so that will probably be in the 0.5 update or later. So that glitch is going to be something that's going to be there for a while, mostly because it's very, very hard to fix. To combat this in the 0.3 update, when I update the models and everything, is I'm basically going to half the scale of the world. The world's not even close to being realistic scaled right now, so it does pain me to make it even smaller, but I'm going to take it down to a 50-kilometer across planet, half the scale there, so that way everything gets closer in, and the effects of that, of the floating point errors will be, the lack of the floating point precision will be less noticeable. You'll still notice it, but it won't be as drastic, hopefully. It'll also help with some other glitches that I'm getting from cameras having these massive culling planes. Like, again, remember, there's the map view camera. That map view camera is the farthest object in the game, and that camera is billions of meters out. So it doesn't, when you're looking at that camera, you don't know where things are within the given meter. And I have to set this massive culling plane for it. So even when you're not viewing from that camera, everything in the world is being rendered in that camera, which also leads to other glitches. So by shrinking the world, I can bring the camera in. That will help with some of the shadow glitches. I can also reduce the field of view on the camera, so the map view won't look quite as wonky. If you notice, that's why the moon doesn't orbit according to that circular path for it. Not even close, actually. It's because of field of view. It's not actually going to orbit correctly because of the way orbits work. Nothing can ever orbit in a perfect circle, which is a whole nother thing. So it's never going to follow that anyway. But in this, so I do need to set up a system that will trace orbits in real time, which I do intend to. That will probably be in 0.4. But in 0.3, the arrow that shows the position of your rocket and the orbital path will get they'll be updated and look faster. I drew that arrow in like 30 seconds in GIMP, so it was never meant to stay for a long period of time. Here you can see I finally get the UVs set up so that way blocks actually have realistic shadowing. And right now I'm trying to set up the material that it's going to use. It was a little wonky. It didn't quite want to do it. I had some trouble getting things to work. I am pretty happy with the system I've set up so far. You can see what the texture, or what it should look like there. That's what it's going to look like when I actually get it to apply to the blocks, so you can actually, it's not blindingly white. Because right now those blocks are just using the default texture, because the game doesn't know what to use, because it can't find it. I don't know why. It's got the file path spelled out correctly. It's just, it's being weird. Anyway, we're pretty much here at the end of the video, and I wanted to say thanks for the support that I am getting from you guys on this game. Making this game has always been kind of a dream of mine, so having started actually getting work on it and making progress, I'm really happy to. Anyway, stay tuned.